The void stretched endlessly beyond the command deck's viewport, a vast sea of silent stars twinkling like distant memories. Admiral Elias Kane stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the swirling abyss of the Andromeda-Terran expanse. Around him, his officers moved with quiet urgency, monitoring the final approach. Every system was primed, every ship poised for action. A sharp beep cut through the low hum of the bridge. Lieutenant Harlow turned from his station, his face pale. "Admiral, Imperial fleet detected. They just exited hyperspace." Kane's gaze flickered to the holographic display before him. Red markers spread across the grid like a contagion, dozens of Imperial warships, battle-hardened and bristling with firepower. The 13th Imperial Armada, as expected. "Distance?" Kane asked, his voice calm. 500,000 kilometers and closing fast. "They've launched advanced probes, but they haven't detected us yet." Kane exhaled slowly. The Empire still believed humanity to be weak, an isolated civilization in the far reaches of the galaxy. They would realize their mistake soon enough. A ripple of anticipation passed through the crew. The moment had come. Meanwhile, aboard the Imperial dreadnought Eternus, Grand Prelate Xyler reclined in his command throne, watching the sensor feed with mild disinterest. Reports of a distress signal from the Andromeda-Terran expanse had been circulating for weeks, a mining station gone silent, an outpost vanished. He had assumed pirates or rebels. Nothing worth his time. Yet now, his fleet had arrived, and the sensors picked up nothing. "Scans?" he asked, his voice a slow, deliberate growl. The Zan tactical officer adjusted the controls. Some residual energy readings, but no sign of enemy vessels. Xyler sneered. "Typical." Just as he thought. "Advance the fleet," he ordered. "Destroy any resistance you find." The Imperial Armada surged forward, a tidal wave of destruction rolling toward the seemingly empty abyss. Back on the TSV Revenant, Kane watched the enemy close in. The pieces were in motion. Execute Protocol Ragnarok. Instantly, the Terran fleet emerged from the shadows of the nebula. Massive warships materialized like wraiths, their stealth hulls deactivating in eerie synchrony. They moved in utter silence, dark metal glinting under the distant starlight. The Imperial fleet froze. Aboard the Eternus, alarms blared. The tactical officer's voice cracked. "New contacts. Dozens of them. They came out of nowhere." Xyler's eyes widened, his mandibles clicking in irritation. Impossible. And yet, there they were, a fleet of human warships. Not the outdated, barely functional relics the Empire had classified them as, but sleek, advanced vessels bristling with unknown weaponry. And worst of all, the Empire's fleet was surrounded. Kane watched the panic ripple through enemy formations. He could almost hear the desperate chatter over Imperial comms, officers scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would pay for it. He tapped the console. "Begin Phase 1. From the heart of the Terran fleet, hundreds of AI-piloted fighter drones launched in unison, swarming toward the enemy like a living storm. Their speed was unnatural, their maneuvers impossible for organic pilots to replicate. The Empire barely had time to react before the first wave struck. Explosions ripped through the Imperial vanguard as the drones tore through their defenses, weaving between laser fire and missile barges like specters of war. On the Eternus, Xyler shot to his feet. What kind of technology is this? How are their ships moving like that? The enemy fleet was not just a match for them, it was superior. "Raise shields. Return fire. Destroy them," he roared. But Kane wasn't finished. The second phase had already begun. At his command, the Terran dreadnoughts powered up their grav disruptor cannons, an experimental weapon capable of manipulating spacetime itself. With a single pulse, the Empire's formations descended into chaos. Gravity fields twisted violently, dragging enemy vessels off course, shattering their rigid structure. Imperial warships collided into one another, their thrusters unable to compensate. The once mighty 13th Armada was crumbling before it even had a chance to fight. On the Revenant, Kane remained still, watching the battlefield unfold with cold precision. Status? Harlow's voice held a trace of awe. They're breaking formation. We've disabled at least 10 vessels. Their flagship is trying to retreat. A thin smile touched Kane's lips. They finally realized they were outmatched. But this battle was far from over. Aboard the Eternus, Xyler's clawed hands gripped the armrests of his throne. His officers were shouting, scrambling for solutions, but none came. Never had he considered the possibility that humans could fight back. That they could win. His pride twisted into rage. If this was how it had to be, then so be it. Activate the Eclipse Lance, he growled. The crew hesitated. But, Grand Prelate, the weapon is untested. Do it. From the depths of the Eternus, energy crackled. Kane's eyes narrowed as he saw the readings spike. They were preparing something big. Brace for impact, he ordered. The Empire had just played its trump card. But Kane had one of his own. And the next move belonged to humanity. Whatever the Imperials were activating, it wasn't standard weaponry. Eclipse Lance charging, Lieutenant Harlow reported, tension lacing his voice. Power levels are off the charts. If that thing fires, it'll take out half our fleet. Kane's jaw tightened. He had expected retaliation, but not this. Time to discharge, he asked. 70 seconds. Not enough time to evacuate, but more than enough to turn the tables. He activated the fleet-wide comm. All capital ships, engage disruptor pattern Theta. Target their reactor conduits. Scramble the Eclipse Lance's firing sequence. Confirmation signals lit up the screen. Kane turned to his weapons officer. Commander Rains, can we neutralize it? Rains grimaced. Not before it fires, but we can delay it long enough to make their mistake permanent. Kane nodded. Do it. The Terran fleet surged forward, weapons cycling to full power. They had spent years preparing for this day, decades of secrecy, silent development, and engineering the impossible. The Empire had ignored humanity, dismissed them as irrelevant. Now, they were about to learn the cost of arrogance. Aboard the Imperial dreadnought Eternus. Grand Praetor Xyler paced before the holomap, claws tapping against his gilded armor. The Eclipse Lance's power levels climbed steadily, but he felt no triumph, only unease. The humans should have been retreating, should have been begging for mercy. Instead, they were advancing. Fearlessly. Calculated. Praetor, they're focusing fire on our reactor relays, his tactical officer reported, mandibles twitching in alarm. They're trying to destabilize the Lance's discharge. Xyler's gaze darkened. Shield the conduits. Redirect auxiliary power to defensive turrets. A pause. They already anticipated that. Our turrets are being overridden. Xyler froze. What? The officer gestured at the display. One by one, Imperial defense grids were shutting down, not from direct fire, but from within. A soft chime sounded. A new transmission was coming through. Xyler's chest burned with fury as he accepted the call. A human face appeared on the screen. Admiral Elias Kane, Xyler growled. Kane's voice was steady. Grand Praetor. I'd say it's a pleasure, but we both know that's a lie. Xyler snarled, but Kane cut him off. You think your Eclipse Lance is a god-killer? It's not. It's an over-engineered antique with a glaring flaw. Xyler's eyes flicked to his officer, who gave a slow, silent nod. Kane was right. How? Xyler demanded. Kane's expression was unreadable. Because we built something better. A deep rumble shook the Eternus. Xyler's stomach twisted. Status? Catastrophic feedback surge in the Lance's core. Impossible. Possible, his officer rasped. They've turned our own weapon against us. The battle erupted. The Imperial fleet fired in desperation, but the human ships were too fast, too precise. They weren't engaging in brute force combat, they were dismantling the Empire, one calculated strike at a time. Destroyers moved in tandem, weaving between incoming fire like phantoms, their weapons cutting through Imperial shielding with surgical precision. The first dreadnought exploded, its hull splitting apart as reactor failure consumed it in a blinding inferno. Then another. And another. Aboard the Revenant, Kane didn't celebrate. The battle wasn't over yet. "Is the Eclipse Lance neutralized?" he asked. Rains checked her console. "Not yet, but it's close. Core destabilization at 90%. Kane exhaled. 10%, too much room for error. "Deploy the Tiamat." A murmur swept the bridge. Harlow turned in his chair, eyes wide. "Sir, are you sure?" Kane's expression was like stone. "Do it." Seconds later, the TSV Tiamat, a classified experimental warship, slipped from the darkness. It didn't look like a human vessel. It didn't even look like a ship. It was a weaponized intelligence, an autonomous predator crafted for war. And it was aimed at the Eclipse Lance. Aboard the Eternus. Warning sirens howled. "Something is inbound. We can't track it." Zyler spun toward the viewport and saw death approaching. The Tiamat didn't fire weapons. It unleashed a pulse, a surge of data ripping through Imperial systems, overriding firewalls, hijacking targeting arrays, disabling engines. The Eclipse Lance sputtered, flickered, then imploded. The resulting shockwave vaporized 24 Imperial warships, sending debris scattering like burning embers. Zyler watched his greatest weapon collapse in an instant. The battle was lost. His empire was next. Victory, for now. On the Revenant, silence hung heavy. "Casualty report?" Kane asked. "Minimal," Harlow replied, still in shock. The battle was over. Not yet. Kane turned to the viewport. In the distance, damaged Imperial ships were retreating, their fleet shattered. But Zyler was still alive. And that meant this war wasn't finished. Kane knew what was coming. The Empire would never accept this defeat. And when they returned, humanity would be waiting. The battle was over. The war was just beginning. Spike, Harlow shouted, "It's coming from the enemy flagship." Kane's fists clenched as he realized EXOR was making his final move, the Empire's last desperate gambit. Aboard the Imperial dreadnought Eternus, Grand Prior Zyler seethed with barely contained fury. His fleet was in ruins, his flagship crippled, and his forces demoralized. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. "The humans have underestimated us," he growled, mandibles clicking. "Now, we show them why the Empire has ruled for millennia." His second-in-command hesitated. "Grand Prior, our fleet is in no condition to fight." "We should." Zyler slammed a clawed fist onto the command panel. "Silence. I refuse to crawl back to the Emperor in disgrace." He turned to his weapons officer. "Activate the Dominion Protocol." A ripple of unease spread through the command crew. The officer hesitated. "Sir, that will." A deep, throbbing hum filled the ship as the Eternus initiated its doomsday contingency, the Omega Singularity Drive. The Singularity awakens. Aboard the Revenant, alarms blared. "Sir." "The Eternus is destabilizing space-time." Harlow shouted, then froze, eyes widening in horror. "They're opening a controlled singularity." Kane's blood ran cold. Zyler wasn't trying to win, he was trying to take everyone with him. Commander Rains cursed under her breath. "If that thing goes critical, it'll collapse this entire sector." "How long?" Kane asked. 3 minutes. Maybe less. Options raced through Kane's mind. He had one shot, one desperate move. Bring the Tiamat online. Gasps rippled across the bridge. Harlow hesitated. "Sir, the Tiamat's core is still recovering from the last engagement. If we... It's our only option." Kane cut him off. "Deploy it." The race against time had begun. The TSV Tiamat roared to life, its sleek obsidian hull shimmering against the dying light of the battlefield. Unlike conventional warships, it didn't rely on standard propulsion. Instead, its core pulsed with quantum stabilizers, capable of manipulating gravitational fields. And now, it was aimed at the Singularity. Aboard the Eternus, Xyler sneered. Fools! You can't stop what's already begun. Kane's voice crackled over the comms. You're right, Xyler. We can't stop it. A pause. But we can redirect it. The Tiamat fired a pulse, a cascading gravitational wave designed to alter the Singularity's trajectory. It worked. Barely. The Singularity lurched, twisted, and shifted, away from the Terran fleet and toward the Imperial flagship. The Eternus trembled violently. Emergency sirens blared as the ship was dragged into its own weapon. Xyler's eyes widened in shock. No! This wasn't supposed to. His words were lost as the Singularity consumed the Eternus whole. The dreadnought imploded, crushed into nothingness. And then, silence. The Singularity collapsed, its energy spent. The battle was over. On the Revenant, the bridge crew exhaled collectively, the tension finally releasing. We did it, Rains whispered. Kane's gaze remained fixed on the screen, watching as the last embers of the Empire's fleet flickered out of existence. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Empire had lost a war. But Kane knew better than to celebrate. This was only the beginning. Harlow broke the silence. Sir, we're picking up transmissions from across the sector. Other Terran colonies are. He hesitated. They're calling us the new dominant force. The words hung in the air. Kane turned away from the viewport. He had never wanted war. But war had come to them. And now, humanity was ready to claim its place. The Empire trembles. News of the Empire's defeat spread like wildfire. Once loyal Imperial colonies rose in rebellion. Neutral species reconsidered their alliances. And deep within the heart of the Galactic Empire, on the Imperial throne world of Prora, Emperor Valen sat in silence. For the first time in 1,000 years, he felt fear. He had underestimated them. The humans had been nothing, an inferior, weak species, barely worth acknowledgement. And yet, they had just crippled the greatest military force in the galaxy. Valen rose from his throne, his long crimson robes dragging across the floor. His golden eyes burned with fury. We will not fall. His ministers hesitated. But, Your Excellency. We will not fall. Valen roared. He turned to his high strategist. Mobilize the core legions. Prepare the Citadel defenses. If the humans wish to end the Empire, let them come. Back on the Revenant, Kane stood before a massive holotable, the Terran High Command gathered around him, fleet admirals, generals, intelligence officers. All waited for the next move. A deep voice broke the silence. We have a chance to end this war. Fleet Admiral Saran, a hardened veteran, folded his arms. Strike at Prora, and the Empire collapses. But at what cost? Another officer asked. Their defenses are formidable. If we fail, humanity's survival is at risk. Kane let them argue. He already knew the answer. After a moment, he spoke. There is no turning back. Silence fell. The Empire will never negotiate. If we wait, they rebuild. If we hesitate, they retaliate. This is the moment history is rewritten. He looked at them all, then said, We don't attack to conquer. We attack to end this war. A slow nod from Saran. No more debate. No more discussion. Kane turned to the battle map. Then let's finish this. The siege of Prora. The Terran fleet arrived in force. Hundreds of warships broke through hyperspace, forming an unbreakable wall against the planet's defenses. The Empire's core legions stood ready, their last and most elite warriors gathered in the capital city. Anti-orbital cannons roared to life, firing into the void. The sky burned with plasma. And then, the battle began. Drop pods rained down, smashing into the Emperor's citadel. Elite strike teams poured out, pushing through fortified streets. The final war for humanity's place in the galaxy had begun. Inside the Imperial citadel, Valen refused to flee. He stood on his balcony, watching as his world burned. The unstoppable Terran forces tore through his strongest legions, his mightiest war machines reduced to ruin. For the first time in his reign, he felt powerless. A sharp voice cut through the chamber. "You should surrender." He turned. Standing there was Admiral Elias Kane. His uniform was battle-worn, his armor smeared with dust and blood. His eyes were steel. Valen laughed bitterly. "You think killing me will end this?" Kane stepped forward. "The Empire is dead. You just haven't accepted it yet." Silence stretched between them. Then, Valen exhaled, the fire in his eyes fading. He sank into his throne, defeated. Broken. The war was over. Across the galaxy, a single transmission changed everything. "This is Admiral Elias Kane. The Galactic Empire has fallen." And for the first time in history, the future was humanity's to shape.